All right, so now that I have this button behaving the way that I want to style it a little bit. So I added some styles in here. These are the styles that I have for my button, like I just mentioned, and I wanted to style the button text within it. So I made a style for that text, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to apply that to my text. So I'm just going to say style equals styles dot button text. And then when I save this, I can see that that got bigger. And so it's nice because if we use the same button text style and I wanted to apply that in multiple places, like for example, let's say I wanted to apply that down here, I could just go ahead and do the same thing. And now both of these buttons have the same styles. All right, now this second button uses what's called the touchable opacity, and when I click on this, we'll see that it does get a little bit opaque. You'll also notice that here I have the style for the button as an inline style. Now, when you use an inline style, like I see here, notice that it's inside its own set of curly braces versus the one that's up here where it's only in a singular set of curly braces. So just a couple things to notice about the different styles. You can add more styles after this and just separate them with commas. Like if I wanted to make the width equal to 100, I could go ahead and do that. So you can definitely add all of your styles in line, and you'll see that sometimes when you look at the documentation. I just personally think it looks a lot messier and prefer to have my styles written down below. Another advantage to this is that when the styles are down below, they are pre-compiled versus up here, they are not pre-compiled, so you don't see errors until you run it. All right. If we go to the next page of the notes, we're going to see the alert. And there's a couple different ways that we can use the alert. I have a link here to the documentation. And you'll notice when you look at this, a couple of things that I want to point out here. There are certain things that are only available on iOS and on Android. And as you look at the documentation, you will see that. You'll also notice, let's see, okay, this is what I was looking for. So some of these are only iOS. Some of these here are only Android, and it's nice to know which properties are only going to be able to work in one way or another. Okay, so what I did here was I created a small function that you can copy and paste. So if we take this and we copy this code, notice where it's located. It's located inside the curly brace, but before the return. So we're going to go in here and inside the curly brace, but before the return, and we're going to paste this function. Now, one thing I want you to notice is that for you, this alert is probably underlined in red, and that's because you probably don't have it imported. So we have to go ahead and import that. All right, so the function itself is grayed out, and that's because I haven't yet called it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to adjust my peak button so that I'm calling this function instead of doing this default touchable opacity or this default on press. Now, in terms of what a console.log will look like, if we open up the terminal, and I have mine minimized, so I'm going to go to View Terminal. If you don't have yours minimized, then you'll see it on the screen. And when I press this button, I can see a note that it says, I pressed pink. Now, if I were to go ahead and I were to change this on press, so that way instead of having a written out function here, I'm going to call my alert function. Now, when I click this button, you notice I get a different option here. And if we look at the code for this alert function, you'll see that we have an array of options, and that's what this code is doing. So we have a title and a message. The title is slightly larger, the message is what's underneath it, and then we have an array of options. And the array of options are basically saying what text you want to be displayed and then what you want to do when the user picks that. So you could have something like cancel, send, stuff like that. And depending on what you click on will determine how it responds. And so in this case, I clicked yes, I clicked no. For my purposes, I'm simply just logging the different options. All right, the last thing that I want to talk with you about is the image component. And if you look at the notes, I have a couple different pieces of information here. So for starters, if you're only using a basic image, you can use this self-closing syntax. So what do I mean by that? Well, when we look at our syntax for the text, for example, we have an open and a closing tag. But for something like my button, I have an open, and then because there's not really an end button, I can use what's called this self-closing syntax. It makes it a little bit cleaner to look at. I don't have to do that. I can have the end button tag. I can do that. It's going to work the same way. It just looks a little bit clunkier. So if you don't have anything inside of it, then you can use this self-closing syntax. Now, I can't do that for my touchable highlight because my touchable highlight has a text tag inside of it. So this is what I mean when I say if there is something inside of it. So my button has nothing inside of it, so that's why I can use the self-closing syntax. My text does have something inside of it. It has the actual text. My view has something inside of it. It has all of these items. So when I have something inside of it, I have to close that tag. Now, if we go back to our image, you'll see, your basic image, you can just have your styles and you could have your source. And your source is where the image is going to come from. Now, in this example that I have provided, I have 3 different ways in which I'm showing an image. So the first way is this is an image that I put inside of my images folder, and I'll show you that in just a minute. Now, when you have an image that already is inside of your folder, we have to use this require function. And I put a little explanation there for why we need that. By putting these image styles, what that's going to do is style the actual image itself. Now, let's say I have an image that I'm pulling from an online source by using a URI, which is the link. In that case, I have to provide the dimension sizes. If my image is coming from my actual project, like it's in a folder in my project, I don't have to give it a size because it can tell how big it is based on the metadata of the image. However, if I'm getting that image from an external online source, I am required to give a height and a width. Now, this website here, this pixum.photos, this website's great because it just generates random images. So if you just want to get a picture on the screen, don't really care what it looks like, that's a great way to get a picture on the screen. Now, the last thing that you can do is you can declare a variable for an image. Why would you want to do that? Well, there's a lot of reasons why you might want to. You might think it's not necessary, so then don't worry about it. But you'll notice that this syntax is very similar to what we had here when we were trying to access the image. This syntax is a little bit different because I'm trying to tell it where to find the picture. I've got this .. is telling it to go backwards a few folders. That's all relative to where the file is located. So don't focus on that right now. What I want you to notice here is that I'm giving the image a variable name, and then later when I'm saying I want to include the image, I'm giving it the name of what source I want, and this variable name will be found here. All right, so lots of different ways we can play with our images, and I encourage you to go out and explore them. All right, so I added a couple examples here to demonstrate the images, and you'll notice first of all that I put the images in its own image container, and for this image container I made it a gray box, and I went ahead and I made it so that the items within the box would be centered both horizontally and vertically. I gave some padding on the inside as well as a margin around the outside. Now, if I wanted this overall box to be centered within its blue container, then I would have to go ahead and I would have to do some centering on the overall container. So if I were to tell my overall container to center horizontally, then that's going to center everything horizontally. And this is where it's helpful to know how to do inline styles if you want to override something. Let's go back to the images. So I've got my chimp, I have this sparkler, and then I have my cute little dog. So I created an image style, and I wanted to make it so that each of these images had a width of 200, a height of 150. I gave it a border color and a border width. Now, one thing that I want you to notice is if I take out the border width, you'll notice that the red went away. And that's because even if I give it a color, if I don't tell it how thick I want it to be, I'm not going to see anything. If I were to take out this margin, now these pictures are going to be smushed up against each other, which doesn't look very nice either. And then if I were to go ahead and I were to change this width and height, we'll notice that the images are going to get slightly distorted because they don't fit the size that I told it to be. And so that's where there's different settings that you can use with your images, and you can play around with that by reading the documentation. If we go up to how I included them, this first link I included with the way of creating a variable, and we can see my variable is declared up here. Now you might be wondering, how did I know which file path to use for this? So let's say I wanted to make a variable for my dog. So I'm going to tell it that I want to import it. And so first of all, if we look at our folder path here and we look at where we're located, this file is right in line with app. However, app is in line with assets, and I'm inside of app. So I have to tell it to go out so that way I can go in. And so this .. tells it to go backwards. So if I say .. then I'm going to see the options that are available to me. So now I'm sitting out here at this level. And so it's telling me that I can go back into where I was, or I can go into assets, and assets is what I want. And then from here, if I want to go inside assets, I can see what's inside there. And so I can see that I have my images. And then if I click / again, I'll now see my options that are inside here, and I can start choosing, and I can choose my dog. That's dog PNG. And so now I can go ahead and instead of having my chimp variable, I can change this to be my dog, and now I'll see my dog again. So, all right, well, I hope this was helpful, learning how to work with not only the default button, but also both the different types of touchables and then the image tags. So I didn't exactly show all of my imports as they were happening because I had some of them pre-ready, but these are our imports that we used. We had a special function that we created so that our alert could have more options. And so that's where we saw this right here with the different options. And then last but not least, I created some different styles. I had a style for my overall container, so this blue container here, and then I had my style for my button here. That's where I have the rounded edges with the border radius. I have this one, which doesn't really have a whole lot on it because all I did was make it pink. And then I have my image container, and I have my overall image. All right, hope that was helpful.